the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. My name is Mackie. I do anime, gaming, and manhwa. Every now and again I do an anime, and every now and again I do manhwa, manhwa. This one for the month of December is the only anime that came out, um, not from a Japanese studio in Japan. Um, well, it was made by a Japanese director, Japanese artist, and his crew, and of course, some Americans and Canadians got involved as well. Um, what can I say about this? This is a good film, but it's not a great film. Um, and the reason why this is the only film for December 2024 is because as I said in the last video, when I was playing Warframe, I believe, the Japanese released their winter stuff in January because their winter is in January, not in December. Typically, Christmas and New Year's are very tied together between late December, early January, but the Japanese actually winter is more mid January. So starting early January is when they first kick it off, and then it goes into mid January, and that's usually their winter season start off, or their year start off is in January. So they see winter as more of a January thing rather than a December thing. Um, how I know this because I've been watching anime for years, and majority of their new stuff always pop up in January, and very few stuff pop up in November and December. It's like when December and November pops up, it's like they're going on a slow vacation. It's like you could feel that they're going on a slow vacation because they released the last of their new stuff in October. Halloween season, so on and so forth. Mystical Era, some of their children stuff, anime stuff. Um, and then after October, it's like it's the kick your feet back and relax period, and just release your OVAs and your continuing series. That's what November and December remind me of. But for the month of December, this is the only anime that's actually considered brand new, not a continuing series, not an OVA, not made for children, not some pervy stuff, and not a web comic. This is an anime. It just wasn't made by animes. Well, it was made kind of by like anime studio, but it was an anime collaboration. Even though the art director and direction is anime, and but other people other than the home country of Japan were involved. The name of the director for this is Kamamiya, I believe, Kenji Kamamiya. And this guy's been known for many things way back in the days. Now, here's where my frustration with this film lies before I even get into it. Um, this guy is known for DuckTales when he was young back in the days for doing artwork in DuckTales in the 80s. So he's been around for a while now. His earlier career, like really early career when he was like in 18 and early 20s, were in the 80s, and he directed something DuckTales, and then he did Patlabor, which was famous in Japan in the 80s, and in the 90s he directed one of my top favorite anime series, or anime OVA, correction, my top favorite anime OVA in my top 10 OVA, not anime series, not film, an OVA in my top 10. The Hakkenden. The 90s Hakkenden, not that BS that came out in the early 2000s. The real freaking Hakkenden. He did fucking Hakkenden. I'm sorry to use my language, but he did Hakkenden. How could a guy who did Hakkenden did this, and this came out average? I'm keep thinking myself, but I said, okay, he did Hawking then. Fine, I'll give it a pass. This dude did Genocyber as well. He did Genocyber. I looked it up. He did Genocyber as well, way back in the days. Oh, you're not from the 90s? Well, let's go to the 2000s. He did Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. Even when millennials were little kids and stuff, at least their parents were teens, they knew what Ghost in the Shell standalone complex was. And then when those little millennials became like young adults and stuff, the dude was doing Star Wars Visions. He did the Ultraman. He did the Ghost in the Shell standalone complex 2045. He did the Blade Runner anime, which is like, continuation of Blade Runner after the original Blade Runner um, came out, the Ryan Gosling one. And then he's known for other films as well throughout the years. So he's known for what was the name of that one? Cyborg. It was Cyborg something. I don't remember. But the point is, this guy has been known mostly for Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Frickin' Shell television series, standalone complex, and for the Hawking Den, and for freaking Pat Labor, and for Genocyber, and for Ultraman, and for freaking Star Wars Vision. So this guy is not like a newbie. This guy has been around for a while. I forgot he. Let me just look something up real quick. No, it's popped up right here. I made sure I had it in front of me. He also did Rohan Z, and he also did Jinro. This guy did Jinro. He did Rohan Z, and he did East of Eden. I've never saw an East of Eden. That's probably the only anime I've never seen. So I'm curious, how would a guy who did something like that in the 90s, in the 80s, and early 2000s, all successful films during those periods and television series, how could a guy who did something like that do something like this? And this came out average as best. So I'm going to get into this and I'll describe it to you. And you could decide whether this is average as best. The thing is, I think the main reason why it became average at best is because it is Lord of the Rings. And if you're going to go Lord of the Rings, everything has to be bombastic and heavy and great and epic. And everything in here was not heavy, not bombastic, not epic. They were just epic at certain moments. It was bombastic at certain moments and dramatic at other moments. But it didn't feel like it was following that path. This guy is also known for being part of a crew associated with Miyazaki's work back in the days for Nausicaa. I'm not sure if he ever was part of the crew that was in charge of making that film. But if he's going down that type of route, I would say I don't know what War of the Rohirrim is. So I'll get into it right now. This first scene is a girl called Hera. But before I even get into the first scene of the girl called Hera, Hera, the narrator of this story, telling of this girl on this horse, and this girl's story is Eowyn. And Eowyn is the voice actor of Eowyn is the same person that played Eowyn in the Lord of the Rings films. So they got her back for this. And she's telling the story of this girl and her great lineage that no one knows about except the royal family of Rohan or some people within the courts of Rohan. No one knew about her. Through the times that passed, she wasn't known because apparently the king that became the king of Rohan became king of Rohan through the cousin's bloodline. So the previous king, before the cousin's bloodline took over, everyone knew who he was, but apparently they knew who he was through tales of legends of his deeds, and his family through legends of deeds. So there's not an actual bloodline passed down through those people because Hera never had kids. so there's no bloodline of that family. So this is the story of the actual true bloodline of the Rohan family. But it's not true anymore because apparently, I'm not sure if this is canon, the whole family died. Like some Game of Thrones shit. So Hera lived, she never died. Because this is actually not, this is not a non spoiler thing. This is a rundown of the entire film. She's the only one to survive, but she chose not to have children. She chose not to choose a mate. She chose not to, even if her mate was a woman, she chose not to adopt a child with the woman. She chose to live her life. And who knows? Maybe she decided to support other people. Maybe she decided to do physical care. It's not described. But obviously, she died over time. But the bloodline of her actual family, if this is canon, they are the originators of the Rohan bloodline. So, or should I say, the original owners of the king of Rohan was her family, and whoever came thereafter and then became part of the whole movies and everything, Helm's Deep, Return of the King, Two Towers, all that stuff, that was from, I believe, the cousins side of the bloodline. So that's very interesting, and that held me in interest with regards to this film. So I'm now going to start this. So the first scene is her riding on a horse. We see her on a horse. She's fierce and free. Eowyn's telling the story of Hera and fierce and free. The next scene we see is a familiar scene, that of Rohan. Um, and the Rohirrim that live there, or however you want to call them. And in comparison to scenes from the film, it's pretty much the same. It's like having a house that's been around for more than 200 years and it still looks the same, because it would look the same, just slight changes. It would still be on the hill. Certain things of the house will still look the same. The only minor tweaks will happen within the 200 years, but not many vast things would change with regards. So whoever was the art director of this did a good job with regards to keeping things similar to that of the film, and only tweaking certain things in association with the house of Hera's bloodline of Helm Hammerhand, or should I say Helm Hammerhand's bloodline, because if you know, in the films, Helm Hammerhand is a type of a mythical um, story of the Rohan lineage. So moving on from that, we get to see Hera inside of the main hall of the Rohirrim, and they're telling stories of the Shield Maiden. And I believe the main reason why the narrator Eowyn is speaking of Hera and her story is because this character Hera was kind of an iconic, or maybe a character that Eowyn looked up to, because Eowyn knew of these bloodline and knew of this house, and she's probably thought it to be tragic and sad, but very true at the same time, that how she defended her family and she destroyed those who would try to bring her family down. But in the end, she'd get to live and live the life that she wanted to. And maybe that's what Eowyn, when she was young, she emulated in the Lord of the Rings films. Now, I'm just spitballing, but I believe that might be the reason why, because Hera is known as a shield maiden, as Hera herself has passed on the information from other shield maidens onto her of how to be a shield maiden. So, that said, moving on to the next. And the first person you see in this scene here is Helm Hammerhand. And Helm Hammerhand, I would say, is far more of an interesting king than the king that was present in the Lord of the Rings film, the Two Towers. Um, Even though I kind of like that guy as well, but I like this version of the king because he's more. He reminds me of like if Conan was Conan for a very long time, and eventually acquired a kingdom and sat on the throne of that kingdom. This is who Helm Hammerhand would be. would be like this guy feels like he was Conan. And eventually, in time, he settled down, acquired an empire, built lands, people followed him. Eventually, he had a nice little civilization, and he was very powerful, even all the way up to an old age, because when he was very young, no one could stop him. So even when he became very old, he was still very strong, just not as strong as he was when he was very young. So this guy is very powerful. And moving on from that, we get to the next scene where we see another gentleman pop up into the scene, and his name is Freca. And he's a lord of a land somewhere associated with lands of Rohan. Many lords are present within that of the Rohirrim lands or that of other lands within Middle Earth, but mostly that of the Riddermark. So I would say this guy is the most pompous person within, maybe in all of Lord of the Rings stories. How he's depicted in this anime is very brash, and he's not a drunkard, but he wants to claim the land from Helm Hammerhand, or not just the land, but the throne as well from Helm Hammerhand. And he knows that Helm Hammerhand is a certain age, and eventually, he believes that because he's older now, very older now, that this will be a great time to strike. He knows of his strength, but he knows of his age as well. Which is very foolish on his part because, as we see, um, Helm Hammerhand decides to stop him and tell him, listen, you can't come into this court and start talking smack and all this about, Gondor is this, Gondor is that. We're more powerful than Gondor. Gondor needs us and all this stuff. And if we want to stand a fighting chance and being on equal terms of that of Gondor, we should never be service to Gondor. We should be equals to that of Gondor. We need a stronger leader. So Helm Hammerhand decided to stop him and tell him, let's take this outside. And eventually they get into a fight outside. But before that, the son of Freca decided that it's a good idea to interact with Hera because they were childhood friends and so on and so forth. And since Freca himself wanted his son, who's over here, to marry Hera, because he thought it's a good idea. That's where he could claim the throne. Um, Helm Hammerhand himself knows that this is a lie. In all truth, even if his son married Hera and they do wed and they do have kids, Helm Hammerhand eventually realized that it's very likely that Freca would probably kill her afterwards once he claimed the throne because he doesn't really give a damn about the Hammerhand family or Helm himself or his children, both Hama or Helmuth. Is that his name, Helmuth? Helith or Hera. All their names starts with an H, I believe. Let me see if I got that right. I think I wrote it down somewhere. Yeah, Hama is the eldest son, and Helith is, I believe, the second oldest son, and then there's Hera, the daughter. So that happened. Eventually, they got into a fight. Freca got into a fight with Helm. This part of the story, at the beginning of the story, the first 25% of War of the Rohirrim is very good. I would say very good. The story picks up. You want to know what's going on. Eventually, Helm Hammerhand hit him so hard in the face that Freca fell to the ground. Now, Freca's a big guy, big, brawny type guy, heavy set guy. But the problem with Freca is that, he's not a brawler type. He's just big and he's young. So he was using his weight as an advantage, figuring because his weight and his age, he would win over the king. That typical will be this case. Unfortunately for him, it would be the case if the king was, a weakling and stuff, or wasn't a strong guy. The king was a strong guy when he was young, very strong when he was young, and retained probably half of his strength as he got very old. But even half of his strength as he's very old is strong enough to knock out Freca, who doesn't even represent half of Helm Hammerhand's strength, which means you're talking about a guy who was a barbarian king, who aged in time, fighting a guy who's not a barbarian king, who's just a average lord who just have weight on his side and youth. So he isn't. Freca was never a combatant type person to begin with. So the son eventually confronted Helm Hammerhand. Hammerhand is, as it's shown in the anime, is so powerful that he could lift a guy who's over 100 pounds with one hand above his head, with one hand above his head. So that was the problem with Freca. Freca was a dumbass to begin with because he assumed this guy's old, that he's not strong. The guy could lift 100 pounds over his head. Maybe he's training, but he's still using one hand to pick a guy up that weighs more than 100 pounds. That should already have stated the obvious to Freca that he was going to lose. But Freca assumed that this guy age was his weakness. He never thought that Helm Hammerhand retained so much strength. In fact, Freca, Wulf is the name of this young man who is the son of Freca. Wulf also taught this as well, that age would be Helm Hammerhand's doom. Unfortunately, he saw what he saw. He saw his father died with one punch, and then he soon realized how foolish his father was. But being the vengeful type of person he is, knowing that his father's now dead, and the purpose of his father comes to ruin, and that he will probably always be in service to Hammerhand's family because his father's sole goal over all the years was destroyed. He resented Helm Hammerhand's family simply because he knew that he will always be under them and that he was associated with a foolish father, who kind of stamped a guarantee that he would never attain leadership. So in that recognition that he, Wulf, would never ever attain that throne, or the daughter of Hammerhand would never take his hand, he realized his future is now set and permanent. So he decided to take it upon himself to cast vengeance upon Hammerhand's family, knowing that he would never be able to attain any type of throne, any type of nobility. So Wulf is cast out of the lands of Rohan. So because of his father's insolence and because of his father's brashness, that led to his death, and the fact that Wulf decided to attack the king, and for which the king decided to grant him mercy by not killing him, Wulf is cast out. Eventually, he decided to take up residence at Isengard. This was before Saruman took hold of Isengard. So he decided to build an army around Isengard, or a few miles, or some of them actually at Isengard as well. This was an abandoned place, like 200 years. I think the time of the Lord of the Rings story was 183 years. That's what the film said. So I believe for about a good 200 years, Isengard must have been abandoned. And then Wulf decided to take residence there and build an army there. So during the process of this, eventually Wulf kidnaps, or uh, minions of Wulf, I believe his name is Targg, a General Targg, kidnapped her, Hera, to bring towards Wulf, and she wanted to negotiate with him so that none of the people of Rohan gets killed. And Wulf was about to agree with her with regards to making sure people don't die on both fronts, either his men, also his men, and her people as well. But the problem with Wulf, I think, is kind of the problem also with Freca, is that their pride gets in the way of logic. They always feel that someone is looking down on them. They don't see outside of themselves, and because they don't see outside of themselves, they kind of stamped and guarantee that their fate will always be what it is. They will always seeking to acquire power because he always believes someone is looking down on them. As Freca felt the same way too, so does Wulf. Um, so basically, Freca passed his nonsense on to his son, and eventually, in Freca's death, his son kind of took hold of that same type of behavior. But the difference between Freca and Wulf is that Wulf is not as brash as Freca is and reckless as Freca is. He's more tactical, but the behavior of pride and conceit is the same. So eventually, his pride took over his negotiations with Hera, and she managed to escape. And on that escape, she managed to make it back to Hammerhand. And during this period, Hammerhand decided to blame a guy named, I believe his name is Freylaf, which is on the cousin side of Hammerhand's family, the bloodline, the cousin side bloodline. And I believe Freylaf is the guy who becomes king of Rohan in the future. And I believe he was the one that first met Saruman, or Saruman first came to these lands when Freylaf became king. So, yeah, the story, I believe, of things that happened thereafter with Saruman was during the time of Freylaf's position as king, never as Hammerhand's position as king. Moving on from that, Hammerhand tells him to vanish and get out of my sight. You disgust me. My daughter got kidnapped because you weren't doing what you're supposed to do. Fairlaugh says, even though you look down on me and all this stuff, I'm still going to be a sword for you in time. Reminding me of the whole Gondor king looking down on his own son because I forgot his name though. What was his name? I don't remember his name. It's been a while since I saw Lord of the Rings. He wished that his other son was alive and that his younger son was dead. The one that says Gondor has no king, Gondor needs no king. Um, uh, Boromir, that was his name. You wish that Boromir had lived and I had died? And the king said, yes, I wish it. I always like that part. I don't know why. He's so slimy. He was like, yes, I wish that. And then he moved on to the next. So let me continue this. Um, and then moving on from that, um, uh, Hera saw a seal that's signed, a seal stamped on a scroll. And this is a scroll that was, she saw a similar type of seal in that room for which she was kidnapped and brought to Wulf on one of the tables, and she saw a seal. And so when she saw a similar seal inside of the house of the Rohan in King's, not in the king's quarters, but around the quarters of the king by an assistant, she realized that this symbol was present um, in Wolf's charge when he was at Isengard. And so she knows whose seal this is. And this is the seal of, I believe his name was, he's a Lord, or Tharge? No, not Tharge. Thorne. Is it Thorne or like Thorny or Thorn? I think Thorne. Yeah, I'll just call it Thorne. Maybe I'm butchering it. His name was Lord Thorne. And Lord Thorne, eventually betrays the king. And on the battlefield, when Wulf is about to meet Helm Hammerhand, Lord Thorne does not show up with his reinforcements. So when Wulf invaded the Rohan lands with his army, and Helm Hammerhand, his sons, met him on the battlefield with their armies. They didn't have reinforcements, so because Lord Thorne didn't show up because Lord Thorne was in league with Wulf, and that's what happened. Eventually, a battle ensues. A huge freaking Oliphant um, busts through the whole door of the keep and was charging straight towards all the townsfolk and stuff. But Hera had evacuated um, the town in time, and everyone got out through the back alley, kind of like something straight out of the Iliad when evacuation Paris and everyone evacuated the Troy. So it's something similar to that. And eventually, Hera decides to, with her brothers, join the combat to fight off Wulf's people, even though the entire town was burning. But she took her sword, started taking out some people, so on and so forth, along with her brothers. Her bigger brother, her older brother, took out one of the giant elephants. And eventually, after her older brother took out one of the giant elephants, I believe he took out this one specifically, um, the same way Legolas did in the film. He eventually got an arrow shot straight through his neck. So Hama died by an arrow shot straight through the neck. And eventually, Hilith got captured when he realized his horse was out of breath. They were running and running. The king was running away. Hera was running away. Hilith was running away. The remaining troops associated with the king were all fleeing towards Helm's Deep. Now, during this period, it wasn't called Helm's Deep. It was called something else. I forgot what the film called it. But I think Hera is the one that called it Helm's Deep in the film. She coined it Helm's Deep. So, in I'm not sure if that's canon, but Hera was the one that named it Helm's Deep. Who knows? Maybe it's canon, maybe it's not. Or maybe it was always referred to as Helm's Deep, but not many people know of it. So he eventually gets captured, and he eventually gets killed by Wulf. And of course, Helm Hammerhand is now pissed off to his limits because two of his sons are dead. That the fact that both his sons are dead, and he got a couple of arrows shot into him. A lot of his troops got taken out as well. He was left for dead, so Helm Hammerhand was left for dead, but he never died. He left his deathbed and moved on into the snow, and his daughter didn't know where he is, and no one could find the body and everything, so they assumed that he became a ghost. His body vaporized, or some type of crazy belief that his body became a ghost, and he became the myth of Helm Hammerhand, the king that died and became a wraith. So he's seen as the wraith of Helm Hammerhand is now the wraith, and all the bad guys are scared that the wraith version of the king is coming after them. And in the night, he hears people screaming, people dying on the enemy side. Wulf doesn't know how his people are dying. A lot of them are fleeing, so on and so forth. And they all believe that it's the wrath and wraith of Helm Hammerhand, who's now became a wraith and is stalking his troops. And since his troops believe that they can't stop wraiths because it's like trying to, kill death itself, they were demoralized. But this turns out not to be true because eventually, in this scene, as a giant troll, I believe, a snow troll, was about to kill Hera, and a bunch of orcs pop up. Help Hammerhand eventually is alive. He was just dressing his wounds and he was pretending to be a wraith. And slowly but surely, I believe what he was doing was traveling during the night and killing any group of squad on Wolf's team one at a time, slowly but surely, stealth wise. So he was doing like knife attacks, but he was doing it by himself, using just his hands alone. And this was why I say that it was no way Freca was going to beat this guy. If he was killing people in his hands at night, Freca was doomed from the very beginning when he started a fight with this king, even though this king was old. And it's also during this time that we get some little backstory with regards to what's going to happen in the future in the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring. Um, a bunch of orcs started to collect rings of all the dead bodies that Helm Hammerhand were killing, and during this period, and they're saying Mordor wants all sorts of rings brought to them. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a ring, you must bring it to Mordor. So this is way before the story of what what happens in the Fellowship of the Ring and Two Towers and so on and so forth. So this is during the period when the orcs were spread throughout all the land collecting rings. They don't know why they're doing it. They just know they're supposed to do it. The wraiths gave them charge and so on, and no one knows why they're doing it yet. So apparently, the wraiths that do work for the Mordor, the kings, the undead wraith kings, knew that the Witch King wanted rings because maybe only the Witch King knew that Sauron was going to return eventually, so he has to set out all those minions out to do these deeds. But continuing on with the story, eventually Hammerhand decided he's going to rescue his daughter by saving her life, and he tells her that you are now in charge of Rohan. Uh, kind of a stupid part of the film. I would say this is the part of the film where things start to go down the shitter for me, because even though the first 25% of the film was good, by the time you got to the middle part of the film, there was nothing exciting about the middle part of the film. It's like watching the Two Towers. When the first part of the Two Towers started, you say, great, the first hour of the film started. By the time you're going towards the second hour, you're bored as shit. And by the time you get towards the end of the Two Towers, then you're excited again. So that was the second half of this story, War of the Rohirrim. So they started out great with the first 25%, but by the time they get from the 25% on to the halfway point, which is the climax of the story, it started to get, in all truth, it started to get boring after the climax of the story. And this is the first time I've actually seen an actual film that it got boring after the climax, because after Hama died and after Rohan was burnt, things were going very good. People were plotting. Hera was, trying to stop Wulf. Wulf was scheming. Thorne was doing his own thing. Eventually, Thorne betrayed them. All this stuff happened, and the climax of the film was Halef dying, Hama dying, and Helm Hammerhand getting mad, arrows slapped into him, and of course the entire Rohan village, the town of Rohan got burned to the ground, or majority of it, before they flee. So that part of the story, the first half of the story, is great. It's everything that happened during the second half of the story going into the third act wasn't good. So the second act of the film, which is after the climax of the film, was terrible. So that's no good. Now on this one, I would say this in this scene right here. This is the scene where Helm Hammerhand is frozen. And in this scene, when Hammerhand is frozen, the body got frozen and he's stuck in place, and that's it. That's the end of his story. That's how he died, standing up. So that's pretty much the conclusion. Moving on to this scene, this is the scene of the Great Eagle. And this Great Eagle is a character from the beginning of the story. Um, it was present at the beginning of the film, and it came in as an example going towards the third act of the film. and it's a necessary part of the third act of the film. Moving on from that, we then get to this scene where I believe Hera decided to confront Wulf again, but this time within wearing a white wedding dress. Now, this is not the scene where I believe he dies, but I do believe this is the scene where she distracts him from uh, attacking the people at Helm's Deep. Moving on from that one, we get to the next scene where we see Wulf. I see I have to make sure I keep quiet sometimes. Every time I hear people in the background, the first thing I think is that they're overhearing or listening to things that they're not supposed to be listening to. So I paused for a second and I was listening around and I realized, we're like, geez, man, you really, there's so many things that are going on. You really have to keep it down sometimes, or at least you have to manage what you're saying and don't speak out too much regards to your personal thoughts on something, or when you're describing something, don't talk too much with regards to what it is, because there's always someone listening and stuff. So I've always disliked where I live, and it always have annoyed me and interrupting me because there's always someone moving around, and there's always someone in the background. So I'm just gonna continue the story as I was before. At this scene, we see the guy named Targg stated he's not going to help Wulf anymore. And he's not going to help Wulf anymore because he now realizes Wulf is not who he thought Wulf would be. He followed Wulf and Freca because he believed that one day they would take up the position of king of Rohan and rule all of Rohan with a more strong and determined will and uh, more powerful and more, I guess, not self-assured, but guaranteed result leadership. Then he knew that Helm Hammerhand was our strong leader, but he knew that Helm Hammerhand was a strong leader in the past. He joined Freca's side in time, realizing that such a time for Freca, in order for Freca to move forward, he needed to take the position of leadership of that of Rohan. So when Freca died, that passed it, that passed on to Wulf. But unfortunately, he General Targ eventually realized Wulf is nothing like Freca. In fact, he realized Wulf is worse than Freca because Freca, even with all his bombastic nature and conceit, had some sense of honor about him. When Freca was fighting Hammerhand in a hand-to-hand combat, that was something he thought was honorable, and whoever won will eventually take the seat of Rohan, or at least confirm that a stronger leadership is needed. So his father did things more traditionally. Unfortunately, Wulf is not his father. Wulf doesn't care about doing things traditionally or with honor. Something that his father had, as much as I would say, as much as a piece of garbage his father was, his father at least had some sense of honor. Wulf has none. Wulf doesn't respect honor. Wulf doesn't follow honor. Wulf is basically a pirate in the form of a noble. That's what Wulf is. A person who would do anything to win a battle. That's who Wulf is. And eventually General Targg sees this and realizes and tries to stop him or by saying, I'm not going to follow you. You're going to have to fight your own battles. Wulf eventually kills him, stabs him then and there. And this was after the fact that Hera had beaten him. Because Wulf had to, or should I say General Targ had to see it with his own eyes that Hera bested him in a hand-to-hand combat of a test of, not of strength, but of skills with using the sword. So Hera is better than him as a sword fighter, even though Wulf is stronger than her in physical force. So she's more agile and she's faster. And General Targ sees that he she bested him, and he realized he got bested, but he doesn't care. So he's still going to try to kill everyone within Helm's Deep. So Targ said he's not going to allow it because Wulf has no honor. He gets killed, and of course, Wulf set all his men to a charge towards Helm's Deep. But unfortunately for him, Freylaf shows up with the other group of supporters of the Rohan family, the royal Helm family. And eventually, once they realize whatever remaining troops Wulf had, they weren't enough in order to fight off the reinforcements sent by Freylaf. At least Freylaf's army was much bigger than that of the remaining amount of men Wulf still had that lasted through the winter season, or those who lasted at all, which was a smaller amount, probably about a few hundred men, or probably less than that. So eventually, Wulf lost the fight, or should I say, he in this case of, let's say this is a D&D campaign, he lost the entire campaign itself. And in the end, even though he lost, he still tried to kill Hera. And in this scene, we see the Shield Maiden throws a shield, of all things, like Captain America throwing a shield, towards Hera, and Hera kills him with a shield. So the Shield Maiden kills the enemy with a shield. So not only is she a Shield Maiden, she used the shield to kill her enemy by crushing his throat. So she slams the shield straight into his throat. But she doesn't only crush his throat, she crushes the throat and then she, turns it like you would be turning a cork bottle. So she not only broke his neck, she made sure that it was twisted after by pulling upwards toward his jaw to completely pull it down into his chest. So he's dead as doornails. So once he's died, which is very funny in this situation, I thought it was very humorous because they're holding hands, and it's like a till death do us part type of thing. You always wanted to have a wife, but eventually the wife you want would never be your wife to begin with. So it's kind of like, this is the part of the film I thought was kind of stupid, because she even admitted to him that she was never interested in married to him. Um, she never really cared about him when they got older, in a relationship wise. She only cared about him when they were older as a friend. So the whole holding hands thing is not in the sense of, she's holding his hands because she cares. She's more like holding his hands because she's forcing him down to the ground. I thought that was amusing because that's clearly what she's doing. She's not holding his hands out of caring. It's holding his hands out of forcing him down with both the shield on his neck and his hands downward, which doesn't really make sense because even, if we're talking about strength, he would overpower her with regards to the hand itself. Maybe not the shield because the shield's crushing his neck, but that hand clearly would have overpowered her, which doesn't make sense. But I guess because the shield crushed his neck, he had no strength and he was pretty much done for. So the whole dress thing doesn't really make sense, other than the fact that it was used as a distraction to pull him away from killing people within Helm's Deep, which was good. But the whole scenario with him and her was kind of stupid. I like the whole killing him using the shield to crush his throat, but the whole, you know, him holding her, she holding his hands is kind of dumb. And then I would say the last 40 minutes of this film was kind of stupid because the last fight of the film you think was going to be something so great, so tremendous, so awesome, turned out to be quite boring and lame. So the third act of the film was the worst part of the film, and only the last 5 minutes of the film was good, which is from the moment Wulf attacked Helm's Deep, and then she popped up in a dress. That's when it started to become good again. But previous attack before were kind of boring, and situations in between that led to it was also boring. So yeah, um, I would say the first act of this film was good. The second act of the film, which was, I guess the first act would be 35% of the film, and the second act would be before the climax, but after the climax as well. So the second act of the film wasn't good, and the third act of the film was good, but also wasn't good. Or in this sense, let's put it this in this context: the first act of the film was good. The second act, leading up to the climax, was good. But after the climax, going towards the third act, it was bad. And the third act wasn't that good either, except the last 5 minutes of the film. So I would say this film is about average at best. And afterwards, I believe Hera told her Freca to let the other bad guys go, who were going to kill the people inside of Helm's Deep, which also didn't make freaking sense. Be like, literally, these guys are hired mercenaries going to kill everyone, but she told them to, grant them mercy, let them go back to their families and stuff. At what point in this film did it ever say any of these mercenaries had wives and kids and have anything to go back home to? For all I know, when the scene I saw certain scenes of certain mercenaries talking, all of them were interested in money. They didn't sound a thing like they were men that have wives and kids. So the fact that she mentioned let them go back to their husbands and wives, like, at what point in this film did it ever show them talking about their wives and kids and everything? So I thought that was actually dumb as well with regards to the film. Didn't really make sense. So the most I could see myself giving this film is like, this is a passable film. Like, if you were to score this based on you getting scores in school, this would be like a C minus film. I would say I would give this film a seven at best. I don't really care whoever rate this or who anyone else rating this. I'm looking at things with regards to how things were done, not just, oh, it was a spoof of Lord of the Rings, or it wasn't good as Lord of the Rings. This was supposed to be its own story. Um, so I saw the value of the film. I was interested in the film going all the way up to the second half of the film, and after the second half, I got bored. And leading towards the end, that's when I started to become more interesting. So it was most of the first half and second half I was interested in, and the second half was remaining of the second half was bad, and the remaining of the third part was also bad as well. But the ending was pretty decent. It wasn't great. So this film falls into a category of half good and half bad. And when something falls into a category of half good and half bad on the weighted pendulum, the only thing that's keeping it from falling apart is how much you liked it, how much you enjoyed it. Otherwise, this would have been a solid six, because the half and half is five, and six would be I enjoyed it. So I slightly enjoyed it more than I thought I did, but at the end of the day, I know its value is weaker than it's supposed to be. So it's definitely not a film in the B. This is barely passable film. So I would say this is a C. Is it a great Lord of the Rings story? It's a great Lord of the Rings. Like, if Lord of the Rings had an episode that you've never seen before that's part of the Lord of the Rings mythology, it would have been a great Lord of the Ring episode. This should have been an episode or part of a mini series, but as a film, it should not have been a film. So it's still good, at least good enough. I would say it. In all truth, this goes anywhere from a 6.5 to about a 7. I'm giving it a 7, but if I hated this film, I would give it a 6.5. I wouldn't put this film into 5 categories because 5 is saying that's way too prejudice. That's me putting in my own personal prejudice into it. So the lowest I would be able to drop this is like a 6.5. But I'm going to give it a 7. And I would say the last section, when it has Saruman, the last 3 minutes, or should I say the last 2 minutes where Saruman showed up, that's what got me pumping again. That's why I'm saying the last 5 minutes of the film was good, because then they then reference situation with regards to Gandalf. She goes off with the other Shield Maiden, and she received this letter, and so she's going to go and train with Gandalf. And I want to see that story. Where's that story? That story should have been present in this film as well. So her meeting Gandalf, her being trained by Gandalf, Saruman doing his own thing eventually. Um, I'm not sure how when Saruman became corrupted and started to work for Sauron. That would have been fun to have um, the first presence of Saruman first being corrupted. That would have been interesting, but more so her meeting Gandalf and Gandalf being the story would have been also very interesting. This being a story of two um, of Rohan, a people of the lands of Rohan fighting amongst each other, lords fighting against lords, or in this case, lords fighting against a king and the king's family. It's not as interesting as orcs fighting against Rohan, or orcs fighting against hobbits, or orcs fighting against other orcs or something, or even people fighting against those who are not of the lands of Rohan, those who are overseas, who are trying to invade. It would have been even better if foreigners were invaders into the store rather than people around them who were their close neighbors trying to take over the land. So this felt like something straight out of Game of Thrones. This didn't feel like an epic story of them trying to overcome some great evil, or the wickedness. That's what Lord of the Rings is known for, something that's great, that they're trying to overpower and overcome, not just like fighting amongst other people who are trying to acquire power, a simple, almost meaningless type of thing. It's not really meaningless, but it's very weak in comparison to all the stories that Tolkien wrote, and even the films as well. So I never found that a combat of two armies of two different faction, or two different houses just trying to fight for taking over leadership of Rohan is more interesting than fighting a great dark presence that's coming over the land. So I'm not down with this. So I would say this is a passable film. It succeeded in what it's supposed to do, and it still surprised me to this very day. It still does, that the guy who did Ghost in the Shell standalone complex is the art director for this film. I'm not sure if he was a screenwriter. He couldn't have possibly been the screenwriter for this film, because if he was, then the script would have been far better than what it is. I mean, this guy did like Ghost in the Shell, and then Pat Labor. And even though a lot of people say Pat Labor was kind of boring, Pat Labor was more interesting than this. So I'm not sure how I feel about this. I know it's not a failure, but I also know it's not a great story in relations to what War of the Rohan or Rohirrim should have been. When I went to the movie theaters to watch this, and when I decided to find some of the scenes on my computer and stuff from online, I said to myself, well, like, wait a minute, this film should have been something else
and it turned out to be something totally different than what I thought, but not in a good way. So I don't know. If you want to watch this film, you can. If you don't have to. I don't think it would affect anything associated with the Lord of the Rings film whatsoever at all. I think it's an interesting story attached to the world of Lord of the Rings, as stating that these people used to exist and they were more along the true bloodline of the Rohan family. Um, and I like the fact that in the end, she rides off into like the sunset, the same way the story started with her riding, and that it doesn't do the cliche thing of her. This is the reason why I call it a seven. It doesn't do that cliche thing that she has to be married to someone. She has to ride off into the sunset, as a great hero. She is not riding off into the sunset as a great hero. She's riding off into the sunset to seek out her own adventures and stuff. She didn't really save anything other than her life and protect the people that she was trying to protect because her family's all dead. She feels more like a character of um, Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn. That's who she feels more like. Someone who's bound by some type of law related to the family and her bloodline, but she was never really bound to those laws because she was never that person. And she decided to live her life and to save her people the way that she knows best. And as the story ends, she goes off into the sunset, living that life by herself, not attached to a husband, not having kids, not having lovers. She probably is, maybe she's a Mother Teresa type later on, or maybe she is a shield maiden or a bodyguard for someone and she dies in combat, or maybe she turns out to be a Joan of Arc later on within the Lord of the Rings mythology. Who knows? What I do know is I kind of like how it ended. I don't need every character to be in some type of relationship or to end in a bloody mess like something straight out of Game of Thrones. All endings don't have to be the same, so that's why I'm giving it a 7. I don't like the story. Overall, in total, I believe half of the story was good and the other half was bad. So yeah, I recommend this to those who just want to have like an episode or a moment within Lord of the Rings to see a different story, not associated with the main quest of Lord of the Rings. If they want something extra, but if you don't need that extra because it doesn't really alter the events of future happenings with Sauron and Gandalf and Frodo and stuff, if none of the events of what happened within War of the Rohirrim alters anything into the future, because it doesn't, you're not really missing out on anything. So that's pretty much the end of this video, and that's it for the anime of December 2024. I really wish there was more than this, but apparently there isn't. And come January, January is going to be the anime month. January is going to be when all the new boys show up and all the news type stuff are introduced within January, because January is the kickoff month. The kickoff month where everyone's at the starting line and the race starts all over again. And it goes all the way into June, July, when they start tallying up the numbers of what's successful and what made it, what didn't made it, and what anime should become a second season and stuff. So January will be the first month to actually decide what new anime will become second season or third season, so on and so forth. So that's it for this video. That's all I got to say. Um, it was good for what it is. Overall, I believe they could have done so much with it, and I'm still shocked that this guy, Kenji Kamamiya, a guy that did something like Star Wars Vision and Ghost in the Shell, was an art director attached to this. This felt highly, highly underrated for his skill. So either he doesn't know what he's doing anymore, or he didn't have any power in association with the story of this film, which they should have gave him full control of this film, including the script writing. If he wasn't in charge of the screenwriting for this, they should have gave him. And if he was in charge of the screenwriting for this, because I didn't look up the screenwriter for this, then I would say, like, okay, then this guy's done. This guy's done. He doesn't know how to write stories anymore. This guy is done. If he was part of the story, screenwriting for the story and had a say in it, and they all approve of it because of him, he wasn't just the art director. If he was associated with anything that was associated with the production of the script, I would say this guy's done. You shouldn't have listened to him whatsoever. Whoever had the original idea for the script, they should have stuck to that one. But I don't think he was, because he's not the screen credited as the screenwriter for this. He's more credited as the director for this. But who knows? Maybe they brought it to him since he was the director and says that he passed it. So maybe, yeah, maybe maybe this is the end. Maybe this is the end of his run, and maybe the guy doesn't know what he's doing anymore. Because yeah, this was mediocre. It wasn't terrible, but it was mediocre. It was great at certain points. So this is a very much a halfway film. You decide if this film is great or not. But I believe this falls into two territories. One, very awesome, and other, meh. There was nothing that was terrible. That's the best part. Nothing that was terrible. It was meh, and it was great. And that's why I believe it's like a C or a 7. Because I didn't find anything completely terrible. I found terrible moments and terrible situations, and I believe certain things were terrible. But overall, the thing wasn't terrible. Like scenes from 25%, 50%, 75%, all the way towards the end, 100%. There were things within it that were terrible, but the overall value at all those different percentages weren't terrible. So yeah, that's it for this video. I'm done, and I'll see everyone next time. Maybe the January. If I don't do a January anime, I definitely gonna do the January anime in the month of February. So if I don't do a January anime for whatever reason it is, especially if I'm bogged down with work, then it's going to pop up in February, because they don't release a lot of anime in February either. Or if they do release anime in February, it's anime that were supposed to be released in January but didn't make it to January. So I'm going to do both a January and a February anime together if I can't do the January anime. So I'm going to do that in February. If I can't do a January anime, the January one will pop up in February. So that's it for this video. I'm done.